Hey, Kelsey.
Hey, Brooke.
Want to tell everyone what's happening in today's episode?
In today's episode, we are going to talk about how well-behaved women seldom make history.
Oh.
And we're going to learn about a couple women who defied Rome.
I mean, damn. Okay.
All right.
Hello, and welcome to Remedial Her Story, The Other 50%, the podcast that explores what happened to the women in history class. Now, here's your host, Kelsey Brooke Eckert, and her partner in crime, Brooke Neva Sullivan.
Episode 24, Well-Behaved Women and Early Christianity.
I feel like these should never go hand in hand.
Well, yes, except that early Christians were rebelling against the pagan norms of the Roman Empire.
Okay. Well, how do women fit into this? I feel like typically it's a dude that's like, I'm over this. I'm starting my own crowd.
Well, let's back up. So first, let's talk about this quote, well-behaved
I know.
women.
Where does this originate from? I feel like
Okay.
I've seen this everywhere, and
So-
people take claim to it all the time.
Yeah, so we actually have a really awesome TED Talk up on our website that I
Okay.
want to direct everybody to. This is a TEDx taught by Lee Ann Wheeler, and she is talking about the origins of this quote. And it's actually a woman historian who is lamenting how world history is packed full of women who were alongside the men doing good stuff, fighting the good fight. And those women don't make history. The people
Right.
that you hear about are the people that are like giving the middle finger to the system. And those are the women that make history. The Susan B. Anthonys,
The badasses. of
the
women.
badasses make history. But yet history's packed full of these good women.
Yeah.
And their stories are often not heard.
Right.
And I think this is really funny because they were kind of lamenting this and talking about how women, these good women should make history. These women who just like,
We're right there.
we're right there fighting the same fights.
I would agree. I'll play the other side of it. It's like the ones that are making all the noise are typically the ones that someone wants to talk about.
Yeah.
It's rare that they're like, oh my goodness, that beautiful woman Mary who just didn't do anything next to that dude.
Yeah.
Let's write about her.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's noteworthy
Yeah.
because it's different. And
Yeah.
I think that's the
It's
takeaway.
abnormal.
Yeah, that is the takeaway. But I think that's interesting. And so what a cool challenge to us to look for those women
Yeah.
that are right alongside there. But then, so it's interesting because I was thinking about the reviews of the state standards and how in the state standards they found that all the first ladies get kind of a passing mention. In the state, in the review of the state standards, they found that these first ladies get mentioned, but most women historians do not write histories on first ladies. They write about these other women that are like making change,
Right.
And so I thought that was really an interesting counterpoint, which is that like in a high school classroom, in a high school textbook, well-behaved women do get named.
Yeah.
And it's actually outside of that the poorly behaved women,
Differently abled.
differently abled women get mentioned.
Rowdy crowd.
Rowdy.
I mean, you got to make a little noise to make some change.
Yeah.
And that's what they're trying to do.
Right.
Because if they just confide to the norm, can't really say that women are going to get the vote.
But it
can't really
certainly-
say that slavery's going to end.
But it certainly leaves people with the impression that women in history were either doing nothing or they were
rebelling.
sticking it to the
Yeah.
system. And I think that's not really accurate. Well,
Okay.
I know that that's not really accurate. Probably most women just go along with stuff, just like most men do. And so, like, the people that stand out and go against that are
Yeah.
probably the minority.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so
So,
where do we go with this?
today we're going to talk about early Christianity. And I want to talk about early Christianity because these are women who, well, first of all, this is a pattern in world history where early converts to religions tend to be women. Muhammad, for example, when he founded Islam, the first convert was his wife, Khadijah. And many other women followed. He had women that fought with him on the battlefield and literally put their body between him and his adversaries.
Okay.
Christianity is no different. Judaism, no different.
Why is that? Why do women convert easily?
Oh, I don't know, but it's an interesting historical pattern. It's a correlation. I don't know the cause. I do think, one pattern there is that it's often loved ones that are the first converts, and so that
Do you think it's
includes,
like blind leading the blind, or is it is it someone empowering someone else, or
What do you think?
I don't know. If my husband came home and he was like, "Let's join a cult," I'm like, I don't know. Sounds risky.
It sounds risky. Here's what I think. I think that, at least in the case of Christianity, well, actually, this is true in Islam as well. In both cases, it offered opportunities to women that did not exist previously. And,
like if you take up this sword, you can read a book.
Yes.
Okay.
If you can read, Islam.
You can own property. You could have power.
You could have, in varying ways, it offered things that women didn't have before.
Okay.
And so in Christianity, women are numerous in the early church. They represent many, many, many followers. And this is something that lots of historians talk about. So I want to just read a little bit from, this is an AP World History textbook. It's called Worlds Together, Worlds Apart. It was created for the 2015 exam, so it's a recent book.
That's recent? Is that like what?
They redo the exam every few years or whatever, and so that was the most recent revision of the exam.
It's a giant green book with huge words on the front. If
Huge
anyone's
words.
looking for it.
And maybe a compass.
Let's see that thing. Oh, if it's not a compass, it's the first clock.
It's a... So when they talk about Christianity in this book, they call it The Rise of Christianity, and this is in the context of talking about the Han Dynasty and Imperial Rome, 300 BCE to 300 CE.
That just seems so fake to me when you say those numbers. Sure. That time existed in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, Kelsey.
Okay. So towards the end, in the middle of this, they have a section called The Rise of Christianity. And they say just a half century after Jesus' crucifixion, the followers of Jesus saw in his life not merely the wanderings of a Jewish charismatic teacher, but a head-on collision between God and the world. Jesus' teachings came to be understood as the message of a divine being who, for 30 years, had moved, largely unrecognized, among human beings. Okay, sorry, I'm reading this poorly. Who, for 30 years, had moved, largely unrecognized, among human beings. Jesus' followers formed a church, a permanent gathering committed to the charge of leaders chosen by God and by their fellow believers. For these leaders and their followers, death offered a defining testimony for their faith. Christians hoped for a Roman trial and the opportunity to offer themselves as witnesses, martyrs, for their faith. Persecutions of Christians were sporadic and responses to local concerns. Not until the Emperor Decius in the mid-3rd century CE did the state direct an empire-wide attack on Christians. But Decius died within the year, and Christians interpreted their persecutor's death as evidence of the hand of God in human affairs. By the last decades of the 3rd century, Christian communities of various kinds, reflecting the different strands of their movement through the Mediterranean as well as the local cultures in which they settled, were present in every society in the empire. Okay, so I look at that and I say, cool, they're telling the story of Christian persecution, blah, 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 but there's no mention of women whatsoever in this, not just in those 2 paragraphs that I read, but in the entire section on the rise of Christianity. And you can't tell the story of early Christians without including the numerous women that are flocking to it. And so that's a little concerning to me as a woman historian looking at that. Where are the women? Where are they at?
Yep.
And so I'm concerned about that.
Okay.
I am also, the problem with a textbook like this is it's insufficient. And so just looking at a textbook, that gives us an overview. It gives us a sense.
Which it should. I mean, if that thing included every piece of anything, all
the martyrs.
that would be a lot bigger than it already is.
Right, and this is a huge book.
It's enormous. That would hurt a kid's back carrying around. But
right.
I can imagine you have to cut somewhere.
Yep. But you also have to find opportunities for stories and narrative.
Well, and to be inclusive.
And
so if you're taking this text and your job is to edit and maneuver and remove and subtract and whatever it is, you have to take the lens of diverse and inclusive. And if you can't, then you're doing a disservice to anyone reading them. Right.
So the Stanford History Education Group has a really great lesson on Christian martyrs, and there are primary documents related to these people and like why they martyred themselves for this early religion. And I think that's a really interesting piece of the story. And why? Right? For a modern audience where, especially in secular United States.
Yeah, it's a tough grasp.
It's a tough thing to really understand. So they have this really great lesson on that. But their lesson does not include the 2 women that I want to tell you about.
Oh, okay.
And because the other thing, and the reason I think these women get left out of history is because, well, first of all, literally everything that one of them made was destroyed.
So erased.
Okay, so literally erased,
solid.
I think, is one of the reasons. But I also think that it's really hard to grasp people who would kill themselves for their faith. Or, just literally all you had to do is say, I'm not Christian anymore. Or I renounce, these things that I've said or believed or whatever. It's really hard to understand why a mother would do that, would not live for the sake of their child. And I think that...
And would have such a deep belief.
Yeah. Because I think that most places around the world think that moms should live for their children, that survival is more important.
Is it? Or is living in your truth so that your child could know yours? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to call.
It's a hard thing to call, but I wonder if that is part of why these stories are just so hard to grasp, but also what cool conversations to have with your students. So, Brooke, let's take a little break, and when we come back, I'll tell you the story of these 2 women.
Awesome. Okay.
For lesson plan ideas and how to teach women's history, visit our website, www.remedialherstory.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Remedial Herstory. If you think what we're doing is needed, please consider joining our Patreon community. Patreon allows you to sponsor a podcast with a small donation. Patrons get access to bonus materials, extended episodes, insider information, and gear. Give at whatever level you can. Patrons who give at the $25 tier will receive a Remedial Herstory mug and a booklet of all the Remedial Herstory lesson plans and resources. This episode is sponsored by our patrons. Thank you to Kent and Jamie Heckel from Ohio, Sarah Reardon from New Hampshire, Leah Tanger from Connecticut, and Bridget Erlandson from Connecticut. You guys make this show possible.
Well, hello there. Do you wish your high school history course had more drinking, more swearing, and more ladies?
Well, do we have the show for you? Her Story on the Rocks is a long-form podcast talking about good women, bad women, fictional women, and non-fictional women from all times and places.
Basically, each week we pair two women who we research with a themed signature cocktail.
You won't be sorry you listened to our latest episode.
Available everywhere you listen to podcasts.
Cheers!
In the early Christian empire, which is late Roman Empire, so we're talking like 400 Common Era. Constantine is the leader of what would become the Byzantine Empire, and it's the Eastern Roman Empire. So Rome has split in half, and he has adopted Christianity as the official Roman religion. And Constantine basically creates this Council of Nicaea to determine, there's a lot of Christian documents that are floating around, and people practice Christianity differently everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so let's have some sort of consensus. And that's looking at it in a light way. And so this group of people, clergy, get together and they basically decide the orthodox books of the Bible. And then anything that they don't include gets labeled as heresy, and all of those people who believe those things are persecuted.
It sounds like there's so much that was left out intentionally, and almost to the point of well, these aren't important to us, so they wouldn't be important to anyone else. Because in that, think about that committee at that time and how they felt about women. Obviously, that is coming through in the work that they decided to collect and distribute.
Absolutely. As Christianity is being spread by the Apostle Paul, and sort of paganism, it's sort of like the pagans versus the Christians, and there's a lot of persecution depending on who's in power and who controls. And so there's martyrs on both sides. There are a couple of women that I think history teachers should highlight in a world history class. The first is Perpetua, who is, I might be saying her name wrong, but she is a Christian martyr who, so one of the interesting things about Christianity is I'm quoting Paul here, but early Christianity, a lot of the followers are women. And, you can think like Mother Mary, you can think Mary Magdalene, and there's a lot of debate about Mary Magdalene. She gets, by the Christian church, she gets labeled a prostitute, but those Gnostic Gospels basically confirmed that she was actually one of the first followers of Christ. She was perhaps Christ's favorite follower, and maybe was even his lover. And there are quotes in the Gnostic Gospels where Mary Magdalene is seen kissing Christ, and that other disciples are concerned that Christ loves her more than them. And so there's a lot to that. And people,
I don't want to say that sounds more like the truth, but sounds pretty accurate.
Sounds very accurate.
A man in that time period having a woman worshiper and didn't take advantage of that would be just shocking.
Right. There's a book that was part of the Gnostic Gospels called Mary, and it's the Book of Mary. And I don't believe that it was written by her, but it is entirely about her, and it describes this relationship, contrasting how Mary's talked about in the Book of Mary versus like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the other books of the New Testament, would be a really interesting thing to do with students. Basically, here's a book from the woman's perspective, the Book of Mary. Here's a book from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John's perspective. And sort of look at those different things. And you know, as history teachers, our job is to look at the documents. We are not preaching anything. We are letting students read the sources, and they can decide for themselves. And part of inquiry is, you know, how do these two texts display women? Right.
Exactly. And doing that, like, even with that 3C that you were talking about, it's like, what question can we pose with this? It's like, where is this? And how do you decide with these documents to move forward with your your conclusion of that?
Right. So Perpetua would be a really cool example. She is an early Christian martyr. She, her family is all pagan. She converts to Christianity. She lives near Carthage, and so she is super committed to Christianity. She's arrested for speaking about her Christian beliefs. She's still breastfeeding her first child, or maybe not first, but she's still breastfeeding her child when they imprison her. And we actually have, she's one of the rare educated women who wrote a journal. And so we have her diary entries from when she was in prison. She's super cool. And she talks about basically that her Christian friends basically beg the prison guards to allow her child to come into the prison with her so she can continue breastfeeding. And so she feels like so grateful once her child is returned to her. There's another woman who is pregnant, who is in prison with her, another Christian. And both of these women, along with a bunch of other men, are put into basically, like, think Gladiator, put into a arena where animals attack them and rip them to shreds. And then eventually a gladiator is sent in with a spear to kill her. Fortunately, the woman who is pregnant gave birth like shortly before she was killed. But like both of these mothers are slaughtered because they spoke their Christian beliefs and would not recount them. She describes when her father came into the prison to try to beg her to not be Christian, basically, and she sticks to her guns. She would be a really cool example. And then, so it's interesting because like I said before, Christianity is followed by, and really women dominate the early followers of Christianity. And she's a really good example of that. Eventually, though, we can see with Constantine that it becomes very like unopen to women and their voices. And when Constantine comes into power, he makes Christianity the dominant Roman religion. And so everywhere Christianity,
to adopt it and enforce it and, make it part of their culture.
Right.
And pagans were kind of driven out at that time, right?
Right. And so in Egypt, in a city called Alexandria, there's a woman named Hypatia, and she is really interesting because she was a scholar. She was respected by the people living there, but she was also pagan because she just couldn't see. She's a scientist. She was she was a mathematician, and and
reason and doubt were part of her vocabulary.
Right. And she is interesting because throngs of men and scholars come to listen to her speak. She's in some cases, it's probably like, who's this woman lecturer? That's cool. But in others, I read all the primary sources that speak about her. And one of the interesting things is, and they're all male primary sources, some of them just dismiss her because she's a woman, but others are super just impressed with her intellectualism. She dresses in male robes, and that's an interesting thing because she saw if she dressed as a woman, she wouldn't get the respect. We've been talking about having to lower your voice to be respected. She dresses masculinely to. I
feel like we brought this up a couple other times too. Of like, you have to wear pants to be in a boardroom. It's it's the age old dress like a man to be part of the male culture.
So she gets sort of wrapped up in religious hysteria that comes to Alexandria. She is close friends with one of the
his position is kind of like a mayor, and they're sort of these two men that come into power. One of them is higher ranking, and she's close to sort of the second in command. And both of the higher ranking people are Christian, both have been baptized. But the sort of lower ranking guy is not very, the lower ranking guy is very sympathetic to other religious people that live in Alexandria, like the Jews and the pagans. And the higher up expels the Jews, and there's this like violent clash between the Christians and the Jews in Alexandria, and the Jews get expelled. And but Hypatia is sort of problematic because people see her as, and this is sort of the beginning, not the beginning, but an example of that witchcrafty idea.
Right. Yeah.
She has the ear of this powerful governing person, and he is sympathetic to the pagans, and so it must be her, right? She has some sort of curse on him. And so teaching about her would be really cool, because I think I would argue that if, this really is a battle about religion, right? Pagan versus Christian. It's not directly about sex, but if she wasn't a woman, would they have targeted her? Because she really didn't have any power. She was just an intellectual, and people listened to her.
Yeah. But because she was female, there was that doubt of witchcraft and sorcery and like being a seer. It's like, no, she's just smart.
She's just smart. So she's interesting because, her story is horrifying, and, trigger warning here, people. The Christian mob comes after her, and they recently made a film about this. The Christian mob comes after her, and they pull her from her chariot. They drag her across town, and they hack her to pieces with either oyster shells or roofing tiles. And she dies. The sort of middle management governor flees town. And
well, yeah, you better.
Get out. And sort of that's the end. People point to this as the end of intellectualism in Alexandria. Alexandria prior to this had one of the biggest libraries.
Weren't they like praised as one of the thought leaders of that time period, and where like education was being driven from, and like development and all those kind of scientific research was like started in Alexandria.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was a lot.
They're a lot. I know.
But really cool. Good stories. I mean, really interesting women. So thank you for bringing them in.
Oh my gosh. It's so awesome. So we have lesson plans. We have a lesson plan about these about these martyrs in early Christian history.
Okay.
And so, yeah, they're on the website for people to check out.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelsey.
Thanks, Brooke.
I'm Brooke Sullivan.
I'm Kelsey Eckert.
See you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to Remedial Her Story, the other 50%. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts to bring more voices to the conversation. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.